The assignment arrives on a hungover morning in March of 1999, catching the journalist Tom O'Neill at a low ebb in his freelance career. He is 40 years old, living in a small apartment in Venice Beach, and eager to secure enough money to move back to New York. The editor from Premiere magazine offers him what seems like a straightforward commission to mark the 30th anniversary of the Manson murders. She wants a story about how those crimes changed Hollywood, a retrospective piece that requires interviewing the surviving members of the era's glitterati. O'Neill accepts the job, figuring he can knock it out in 3 months. He views the Manson case as a closed chapter of American history, a tragedy whose details have been exhausted by decades of media saturation and the definitive account provided by the prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi in his best-selling book Helter Skelter. O'Neill assumes his task is merely to collect quotes and add a gloss of nostalgia to a settled narrative. He does not yet know that this phone call marks the end of his normal life and the beginning of a 20-year descent into a labyrinth of cover-ups, espionage, and obsession. His preparation begins with a close reading of Helter Skelter. He finds it absorbing but strangely frictionless, a procedural that presents the resolution of the crimes as a triumph of legal genius over chaotic evil. Bugliosi portrays Charles Manson as a magnetic guru who brainwashed a group of wayward hippies into slaughtering strangers to incite a race war, a motive dubbed Helter Skelter. The prosecutor casts himself as the relentless pursuer of justice who pieced together the puzzle when the police failed. On the surface, the logic holds, but as O'Neill absorbs the text, he senses that the narrative is almost too perfect, smoothing over contradictions that usually plague complex murder cases. He notes the discrepancies but pushes them aside, focused on his deadline. The investigation starts on the ground in Los Angeles, where O'Neill attempts to breach the wall of silence surrounding the victims. He quickly learns that 3 decades have not diminished the fear that Charles Manson inspires in the Hollywood elite. His requests for interviews are met with a barrage of refusals from the friends and colleagues of Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski. The few who do speak describe a community that transformed overnight from an open society of unlocked doors and casual hedonism to an armed fortress of paranoia. He meets with a photographer who visited the crime scene at Cielo Drive alongside a grieving Polanski just days after the murders. The photographer describes the visceral horror of the house, where blood still saturated the carpets, and recounts Polanski's desperate, grief-stricken attempt to find answers using a psychic. This encounter gives O'Neill his first taste of the profound trauma that still lingers beneath the surface of the industry's glitz. Seeking a central figure to anchor his story, O'Neill secures a meeting with Vincent Bugliosi himself. The former prosecutor welcomes the journalist into his home, presenting a facade of supreme confidence and rectitude. Bugliosi is eager to protect his legacy and the sanctity of his book, viewing himself as the final authority on all matters related to the Manson family. During their long conversation, however, cracks appear in the official history. Bugliosi inadvertently reveals details that contradict his own published timeline. He mentions a videotape found at the crime scene that allegedly depicted the victims in compromising sexual situations, a piece of evidence that was quietly returned to the property rather than booked into the police record. Bugliosi claims he ordered the tape's return to protect the victims' reputations, but O'Neill realizes later that the prosecutor was not yet officially assigned to the case when this decision was supposedly made. This discrepancy suggests that Bugliosi was involved with the investigation earlier than he ever admitted, or that he is fabricating elements of the story to suit his image. The journalist files this anomaly away, his skepticism piqued. As O'Neill digs deeper into the social circle of the victims, he encounters a persistent counter-narrative that challenges the race war motive. This alternative theory posits that the murders were not random acts of lunacy but the result of a drug burn gone wrong. He learns that the house on Cielo Drive was a nexus for high-stakes drug dealing, involving characters far removed from the innocent flower children of the public imagination. He tracks down associates of Wojciech Frykowski and Jay Sebring who describe a scene rife with hard drugs and dangerous debts. He hears stories of a dealer named Billy Doyle who was allegedly beaten and tortured by the victims at the Cielo Drive house in the months before the murders. This incident, largely scrubbed from the official record, introduces the possibility of a revenge motive that has nothing to do with Beatles lyrics or apocalyptic visions. O'Neill manages to interview Doyle and his associates, who paint a picture of a Hollywood underbelly where celebrities rubbed shoulders with armed criminals and intelligence operatives. These men are slippery and threatening, hinting at connections that go beyond simple narcotics trafficking, but their existence alone destabilizes the clean moral binary of the prosecution's case. The focus of the reporting shifts to Terry Melcher, the wealthy record producer and son of Doris Day who had previously rented the house where the murders took place. The official story maintains that Manson targeted the house to instill fear in Melcher, who had snubbed Manson's musical aspirations. O'Neill begins to probe the relationship between the producer and the cult leader, finding evidence that their connection was far deeper and more prolonged than Melcher ever testified. He interviews associates of the Beach Boys and other industry insiders who suggest that Melcher and Dennis Wilson were frequent visitors to the Manson commune, indulging in the group's free love and abundant drugs. The timeline of their association becomes a critical point of contention. Melcher claimed under oath that he severed ties with Manson months before the crimes and was terrified of him. O'Neill uncovers witnesses who remember Melcher visiting the Spahn Ranch after the murders occurred, a detail that, if true, would obliterate the prosecution's theory that Melcher was a target living in mortal fear. Driven by these inconsistencies, O'Neill's objective changes. He is no longer writing a fluff piece about Hollywood nostalgia. He is hunting for proof of a cover-up. He extends his deadline with Premiere, promising his editors a bombshell that will rewrite the history of the case. He begins a relentless search for paper trails, scouring court archives and police files that have been neglected for 30 years. He faces immediate institutional resistance. The Los Angeles Police Department claims that crucial files have been destroyed or are permanently sealed. The district attorney's office is equally unhelpful, guarding its secrets behind bureaucratic walls. O'Neill turns to the gray market of information, contacting independent researchers and collectors who have amassed private archives of case documents. He meets a strange collector in a diner who sells him unredacted police reports for cash, documents that reveal the raw, chaotic state of the initial investigation before the narrative was streamlined for trial. These reports show that the police originally suspected a drug connection and investigated suspects who were later dropped from the story entirely to make way for the Helter Skelter theory. The journalist's obsession grows as he pulls at the threads of the Melcher story. He finds the landlord of the Cielo Drive property, Rudolph Altobelli, a man who has remained silent for decades. Altobelli reveals that Melcher was not merely a passive acquaintance of Manson but had once considered managing his career and recording his music. Furthermore, Altobelli drops a stunning detail. After the murders, Melcher moved back into the guest house on the property, living at the crime scene for a period of time. This behavior completely contradicts the image of a man paralyzed by the fear that Manson was coming to kill him. O'Neill realizes that if Melcher lied on the stand about his relationship with Manson, and if the prosecutor allowed him to lie, then the entire legal foundation of the Manson convictions is built on perjury. The investigation leads O'Neill to the office of the Los Angeles District Attorney, where a sympathetic archivist allows him access to a storage room filled with old case files. It is here, amidst dusty boxes and yellowing paper, that he finds the smoking gun. He discovers a legal pad containing handwritten notes from a pre-trial interview with Danny DiCarlo, the biker who served as the family's arms dealer and a key prosecution witness. In the notes, written in Bugliosi's own hand, there is a clear record of DiCarlo stating that he saw Terry Melcher at the Spahn Ranch shortly after the Tate LaBianca murders. The notes show that Bugliosi was aware of this visit. Crucially, this information was never presented at trial, and Melcher testified to the exact opposite. O'Neill holds the physical proof that the lead prosecutor suppressed evidence that would have impeached his star witness and undermined his central motive. This discovery marks the point of no return for O'Neill. He is no longer just a reporter looking for a story. He is a man holding a dangerous secret that powerful people have kept hidden for 30 years. He confronts Bugliosi with the evidence during a follow-up interview. The meeting turns hostile. The charm that Bugliosi displayed in their first encounter evaporates, replaced by aggression and legal threats. He accuses O'Neill of trying to ruin his reputation and warns him that he will face a massive lawsuit if he publishes these allegations. He denies any wrongdoing, claiming memory lapses or insignificance, but his agitation betrays him. The mask of the heroic prosecutor slips, revealing a man desperate to maintain the myth he created. O'Neill realizes that he cannot simply write a magazine article and walk away. The story has grown too large, the implications too vast. He is now locked in an adversarial relationship with one of the most litigious and famous lawyers in the country, and he has exposed a fault line in the justice system that suggests the true motive for the murders was deliberately buried to protect the reputations of the rich and powerful. The weight of the investigation begins to take a toll on O'Neill's personal life. His deadlines with Premiere blow past, one after another. His editors, initially supportive, grow impatient as the scope of the story expands beyond the boundaries of entertainment journalism. He is running out of money, living on advances that are quickly consumed by travel expenses and document fees. He spends his days and nights pursuing leads that often end in silence or threats. The paranoia of the subject matter begins to bleed into his own reality. He wonders if his phone is tapped, if he is being followed. He is warned by various sources, old cops, lawyers, and shadowy figures from the fringe of the case, that he is playing a dangerous game. They tell him to stop digging, to let the past stay buried. But the DiCarlo document is a hook he cannot dislodge. It proves that the official history is a lie, and he feels a moral compulsion to find out what that lie is covering up. O'Neill broadens his scope to include the law enforcement agencies that handled the case. He tracks down the retired detectives from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office who investigated the first murder committed by the family, that of Gary Hinman. He learns that these deputies had linked the Hinman killing to the Manson family weeks before the Tate LaBianca murders occurred. They had identified the suspects, knew their location at the Spahn Ranch, and had even arrested them in a massive raid just days after the Tate homicides. Yet, inexplicably, the family members were released, and the connection to the murders was ignored by their superiors. O'Neill discovers that the sheriff's office and the LAPD were engaged in a jurisdictional turf war that blinded them to the obvious links between the crimes, or worse, that they were ordered to stand down. He finds evidence of a wiretap on a jailed family member that captured a conversation ordering the Tate murders as a copycat crime to free a comrade, a recording that was reportedly destroyed by a police captain. The incompetence and possible corruption of the police become a second pillar of his investigation, standing alongside the prosecutorial misconduct he has already uncovered. As the months turn into years, O'Neill's apartment fills with boxes of files, transcripts, and recordings. He creates a visual map of the case on his wall, a sprawling web of names and connections that grows more complex by the day. He identifies a pattern of leniency toward the Manson family that defies explanation. Time and again, Manson and his followers were arrested for crimes ranging from grand theft auto to rape, only to be released on probation or have the charges dropped. Manson, a career criminal on federal parole, was allowed to travel freely, associate with known felons, and build a criminal enterprise while his parole officer filed reports praising his behavior. O'Neill begins to suspect that this protection was not merely accidental but systemic. He looks for the hand of a higher authority, a force that shielded Manson from the consequences of his actions for reasons that remain obscure. This line of inquiry leads him away from Hollywood and into the darker corridors of the federal government, raising the specter of intelligence operations and social engineering. The relationship with Premiere finally collapses under the weight of the delays. The magazine demands a story, but O'Neill refuses to publish an incomplete account that would only scratch the surface of what he has found. He walks away from the assignment, forfeiting his steady income and professional stability to pursue the truth on his own terms. He secures a book deal that offers him a lifeline, but the pressure to deliver a definitive answer intensifies. He is now a loan operator, funding his investigation with loans and dwindling savings, driven by the conviction that he is the only one who can put the pieces together. He revisits the Melcher connection, pushing harder on the surviving witnesses. He finds a witness who claims to have seen Melcher at the Spahn Ranch on his knees, begging for his life, a scene that suggests a blackmail dynamic rather than a simple celebrity snub. The deeper he goes, the more the standard motive of Helter Skelter appears to be a convenient fiction invented by Bugliosi to secure death penalties, a narrative that effectively hid the real relationships between the killers and their victims. O'Neill's pursuit of the truth brings him into contact with the surviving members of the Manson family. He tracks them down in their new lives, often living under assumed names in remote towns. He knocks on their doors, demanding answers about the past they have tried to erase. Most turn him away, but a few let him in, offering glimpses of a reality that is far more mundane and sordid than the demonic myth. They describe a life of drug addiction, sexual exploitation, and petty crime, presided over by a man who was less a sorcerer than a pimp and a con artist. They hint at other crimes, other victims buried in the desert who have never been found. O'Neill realizes that the body count may be higher than the official tally, and that the justice system's rush to close the case left murderers free and victims forgotten. The first act of his journey concludes with the realization that the story he set out to write does not exist. There is no simple narrative of how the Manson murders changed Hollywood because the accepted facts of the murders are themselves a fabrication. He has pulled back the curtain to reveal a stage crowded with actors who have missed their cues and lines that were rewritten by the director. He stands amidst the wreckage of the official history, holding the smoking gun of the DiCarlo notes, aware that he has destroyed his own life to find it. He is alienated from his peers, threatened by his subjects, and haunted by the violence he studies. But he cannot stop. The anomaly of Manson's protected status and the hidden hand of the state beckon him toward a new and terrifying hypothesis, one that will lead him out of the canyons of Los Angeles and into the secret history of the 60s. Before we move on, please subscribe to our channel, The Recaps, and hit like if you enjoy our videos. Also, don't forget to share this with your friends and family. Let's get back to it. The anomaly of Manson's protected status beckons Tom O'Neill toward a new and terrifying hypothesis, one that leads him out of the canyons of Los Angeles and into the secret history of the 60s. He turns his attention north to San Francisco, the city where Manson transformed himself from a petty thief into a messianic guru during the Summer of Love. O'Neill reasons that if the justice system in Los Angeles seemed strangely paralyzed when dealing with the family, the pattern might have begun earlier, during the group's gestation in the Haight-Ashbury district. He zeroes in on Roger Smith, the federal parole officer who supervised Manson following his release from prison in 1967. The record shows that Manson arrived in the Bay Area as a career criminal with a long history of recidivism, yet he was treated with an unprecedented degree of leniency that baffles O'Neill's understanding of law enforcement protocol. O'Neill tracks down the surviving paperwork from Manson's parole file, a task made difficult by the fact that federal agencies have redacted or lost significant portions of the record. What he finds paints a picture of a parole officer acting more like a patron than a supervisor. He discovers that Roger Smith permitted Manson to violate the terms of his release repeatedly without consequence. Manson was arrested for crimes ranging from drug possession to interfering with a police officer, offenses that should have triggered an automatic return to federal prison. Instead, Roger Smith intervened time and again, keeping his charge on the street. The journalist learns that this benevolence extended far beyond professional discretion. He uncovers evidence that Roger Smith socialized with the family, allowed them to visit his home, and even took temporary custody of Manson's infant son when the child's mother was incarcerated. This erasure of professional boundaries suggests to O'Neill that Manson was not merely a lucky criminal but a protected asset, someone whose freedom served a purpose that superseded the law. The investigation into Roger Smith leads O'Neill to a dilapidated Victorian house in the Haight that once served as the headquarters for the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. He learns that Roger Smith was deeply involved with the clinic, conducting research on the drug subculture under the auspices of a federal grant. Here, the parole officer worked closely with David Smith, the clinic's founder and another researcher fascinated by the effects of psychedelics and amphetamines on human behavior. O'Neill discovers that Manson and his female followers were fixtures at the clinic, treating it as a second home where they received medical care and mingled with the staff. The journalist interviews former clinic employees who recall Manson as a subject of intense interest to the researchers, a charismatic specimen who had successfully created a devoted tribe using the very substances the doctors were studying. O'Neill delves into the academic work produced by David Smith and his colleagues during this period. He reads papers describing experiments on rodents injected with amphetamines and confined in crowded cages, studies designed to measure how drugs and environmental stress could induce psychotic violence. The journalist is struck by the chilling parallels between these laboratory conditions and the lifestyle Manson enforced on his followers at the Spahn Ranch. He finds a published case study co-authored by David Smith that analyzes the family as a group marriage commune, a document based on the first-hand observations of a clinic researcher who lived with the cult for months. This revelation shatters the idea that the family's descent into darkness went unnoticed. O'Neill realizes that these medical professionals were documenting Manson's psychological control techniques in real time, watching as he broke down the egos of his followers and reprogrammed them, yet they never warned the authorities or intervened to stop the escalating madness. As he connects the dots between the parole office and the free clinic, O'Neill stumbles upon a darker source of funding for their research. He finds that the grants supporting their work on drug abuse and gang behavior originated from the National Institute of Mental Health, an organization that was later exposed as a funding conduit for the Central Intelligence Agency. This link opens a door that O'Neill had previously hesitated to approach, dragging his investigation into the realm of covert intelligence operations. He begins to read about Project Chaos and COINTELPRO, secret government programs launched in the late 60s to infiltrate, discredit, and neutralize the New Left and the Black Power movement. He learns that these programs employed agents provocateurs to incite violence among radical groups, thereby justifying heavy-handed police crackdowns and turning public opinion against the counterculture. The journalist considers the possibility that Manson, with his race war rhetoric and hatred of the Black Panthers, was not a sui generis monster but a tool in this larger secret war. He finds evidence that Manson's paranoia about a black uprising mirrored the disinformation campaigns being waged by the FBI against the Panthers in Los Angeles. O'Neill interviews retired law enforcement officers who suggest that Manson may have been an informant, a low-level snitch allowed to operate with impunity in exchange for information on the radical underground. This theory would explain the inexplicable protection Manson enjoyed from Roger Smith and the failure of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office to arrest him despite ample probable cause. O'Neill begins to see the Tate LaBianca murders not as a failure of the system but as a grotesque success of a strategy designed to let chaos reign until it could be politically weaponized. Amidst this expanding web of conspiracy, O'Neill encounters the spectral figure of Reeve Whitson, an associate of the victims and a man who seemed to exist everywhere and nowhere at once. Whitson is described by his former friends as a high-level intelligence operative who moved fluidly between the worlds of Hollywood, the military, and the secret services. O'Neill learns that Whitson was embedded in the social circle of Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, posing as a dilettante while maintaining deep ties to the CIA and the NSA. Witnesses tell the journalist that Whitson arrived at the Cielo Drive crime scene hours before the police were notified, conducting a private surveillance of the carnage before disappearing into the shadows. O'Neill tracks down a former Iranian photographer who was a close friend of Tate. The man reveals that it was Whitson who coerced him into testifying at the Manson trial, threatening him with deportation if he did not corroborate the prosecution's timeline. This testimony suggests that Whitson was working behind the scenes to shape the legal narrative, ensuring that the trial focused on the lone nut theory while protecting the intelligence community's assets. O'Neill finds corroboration for Whitson's status in the unpublished manuscript of a book written by the lead police investigator on the Tate case, which identifies Whitson as a key confidential informant who steered the police away from certain leads. The journalist becomes convinced that Whitson was the handler who managed the interface between the Manson family's activities and the state's surveillance apparatus, a fixer who cleaned up the mess when the experiment went wrong. The trail of the intelligence community leads O'Neill to his most disturbing discovery yet, the involvement of Dr. Louis Jolyon West. A titan of American psychiatry and a fixture at UCLA, West was a celebrated expert on cults and brainwashing who had examined Jack Ruby after he killed Lee Harvey Oswald. O'Neill learns that West was a regular visitor to the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic during the summer of 1967, where he set up a crash pad to study hippies in their natural habitat. But beneath this academic cover, O'Neill finds proof that West was a lead researcher for MKULTRA, the CIA's top-secret program dedicated to mastering the art of mind control. O'Neill spends months in the archives at UCLA, sifting through West's uncatalogued papers. He unearths letters between West and Sidney Gottlieb, the director of MKULTRA, in which West proposes experiments to replace true memories with false ones and to induce psychiatric disorders in unwitting subjects. The journalist reads West's own proposals for creating controlled environments where human behavior could be programmed using hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and LSD. The parallels between West's theoretical work and Manson's practical application of brainwashing are too precise to be coincidental. O'Neill finds evidence that West was in San Francisco at the exact moment Manson was learning to use acid to enslave his followers. He hypothesizes that Manson was not a self-taught guru but a student of the same dark arts that West was developing for the government, possibly even a subject in one of the doctor's field experiments. The magnitude of these findings begins to destabilize O'Neill's life. He is no longer just researching a book. He is inhabiting a nightmare where the boundaries between history and conspiracy dissolve. His apartment becomes a bunker of files and index cards, a physical manifestation of the labyrinth he is trapped in. He stops seeing friends, stops sleeping, consumed by the need to find the final piece of evidence that will link Manson directly to West. He runs up massive debts, borrowing money from his father to keep the investigation afloat. The pressure from his publisher mounts as years pass without a manuscript. They demand a finished book, but O'Neill cannot stop reporting. Every answer he finds spawns 2 new questions, and he is terrified of publishing an incomplete story that will be dismissed as fantasy. O'Neill's confrontation with the legacy of MKULTRA brings him into conflict with the surviving guardians of these secrets. He attempts to interview West's former colleagues, many of whom react with hostility or fear when he raises the subject of the CIA. He realizes that the network of influence West built is still active, protecting the doctor's reputation even after his death. The journalist feels the walls closing in, sensing that he is being watched, that his communications are being monitored. The paranoia that destroyed the lives of the Manson family members now infects his own mind. He wonders if he has gone too far, if he is seeing connections where none exist, but the documents in his possession are real. The letters from West to the CIA are real. The police reports of Manson's protected status are real. He anchors himself in these hard facts, using them as a shield against the madness that threatens to engulf him. The crisis reaches a breaking point when O'Neill's book deal collapses. His publisher, exhausted by missed deadlines and the ever-expanding scope of the project, cancels his contract and demands the return of his advance. He is legally liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars he does not have. He is professionally ruined, his reputation as a reliable journalist shredded. He stares at the wreckage of his career and considers abandoning the project entirely. He could declare bankruptcy, move back to his parents' home, and try to forget the name Charles Manson. But the story has taken hold of him at a cellular level. He cannot walk away from the victims, from the young men and women whose lives were destroyed not just by a madman but by the cold machinery of the state. He decides to double down. He finds a new agent, a new publisher, and commits himself to finishing the work no matter the cost. He expands his investigation to include the death of Filippo Tenerelli, a young man whose mysterious suicide in Death Valley shortly after the family's arrival there was largely ignored by the police. O'Neill travels to the remote desert town of Bishop, uncovering coroner's reports and police files that were thought to be lost. He finds that Tenerelli was likely murdered by the family, his death staged to look like a suicide to avoid drawing attention to the group's presence. The local authorities, engaged in a cover-up to protect their own reputations or perhaps following orders from above, buried the evidence. O'Neill sees this as a microcosm of the entire case, a pattern of violence ignored, evidence suppressed, and justice denied to protect a larger agenda. The narrative moves toward its final confrontation as O'Neill prepares to bring his findings to the one man who might confirm them, Roger Smith. He tracks the former parole officer to his retirement home in the Midwest, securing an interview after years of silence. O'Neill travels there armed with the documents he has spent a decade collecting, the parole violation reports that Smith ignored, the travel permits he authorized for a dangerous criminal. He sits across from the old man, looking for a confession, a crack in the facade of the benevolent social worker. The interview is a cat-and-mouse game, with Smith denying memory of key events, deflecting blame, and adhering to the story he has told for 30 years. But O'Neill presses him, laying out the timeline of Manson's crimes and Smith's interventions. He watches as Smith's composure begins to fray, the weight of the past pressing down on him. The journalist realizes that he may never get a full admission of guilt, but the fear in the old man's eyes is confirmation enough. The secret is real, and O'Neill is the only one who knows it. He leaves the interview exhausted but vindicated, ready to weave the strands of his investigation into a final, undeniable tapestry of truth. Before we move on, please subscribe to our channel, The Recaps, and hit like if you enjoy our videos. Also, don't forget to share this with your friends and family. Let's get back to it. He leaves the interview exhausted but vindicated, ready to weave the strands of his investigation into a final, undeniable tapestry of truth. Driving away from the farmhouse in the snow, Tom O'Neill feels a profound hollowness settle over him. He traveled thousands of miles expecting a cinematic confession, a moment where the weight of 30 years of secrets would finally crush Roger Smith into admitting his role in the creation of Charles Manson. Instead, he got 6 hours of pleasant deflections and memory lapses over pizza and wine. The old parole officer did not break down or beg for forgiveness. He simply shrugged off the past, claiming ignorance of the very documents O'Neill placed in front of him. Yet, in that refusal to engage, in the careful blankness of Smith's responses, O'Neill finds the confirmation he needs. Smith's denials are too practiced, his lack of curiosity about a former client who became the most notorious murderer in American history too unnatural. The journalist realizes that the silence is the answer. The system protects its own, and Smith is a creature of that system, a man who knows that some doors must remain closed to keep the house from collapsing. O'Neill returns to Los Angeles, the adrenaline of the chase fading into the grim reality of his situation. He has spent the advance from his publisher on travel and researchers, betting everything on the belief that he could solve the case before the money ran out. Now the accounts are empty, and the book is nowhere near finished. He is drowning in data, paralyzed by the sheer volume of information he has unearthed. His apartment has become a mausoleum of the 60s, stacked floor to ceiling with binders that document the convergence of Hollywood stars, drug dealers, spies, and killers. He tries to write, to distill this chaos into a linear narrative, but every sentence feels inadequate. To tell the story of the murders, he has to explain the drug burns. To explain the burns, he has to explain the intelligence operatives. To explain the operatives, he has to explain the secret government programs. It is a fractals of conspiracy, an infinite regression that mocks his attempts at closure. The pressure from New York intensifies. His editors at Penguin are no longer interested in updates about new leads or breakthroughs in the archives. They want pages. They want a manuscript that justifies the years of delays and the substantial sums they have invested. O'Neill misses deadline after deadline, offering excuses that sound increasingly desperate even to his own ears. He pleads for more time, convinced that just one more interview, one more FOIA request, will provide the connective tissue that binds the whole story together. But the publishing industry operates on a schedule that has no patience for obsession. His editor moves to another house, leaving him without a champion. The goodwill he garnered with his initial proposal evaporates, replaced by the cold calculus of breach of contract. In a final bid to salvage the project, the publisher suggests bringing in a collaborator, a seasoned professional who can tame O'Neill's unruly research and shape it into a marketable book. O'Neill agrees, hoping that a fresh pair of eyes will help him find the exit from the maze he built. A veteran journalist joins the team, and for a brief moment, there is progress. But the collaborator soon realizes the magnitude of the task. The story resists simplification. Every fact O'Neill has verified contradicts the official record, requiring pages of exposition to dismantle the accepted history before a new one can be built. The collaborator quits, overwhelmed by the density of the material and the uncompromising nature of O'Neill's vision. The publisher offers a buyout, a way for O'Neill to walk away with a fraction of the money and none of the credit, handing his life's work over to a ghostwriter. He refuses. He cannot sell the soul of his investigation to someone who hasn't lived it. The consequences are swift and devastating. Penguin sues him for the return of the advance, a sum that he has long since spent on the investigation itself. He is served with legal papers naming him as a defendant, grouping him with a handful of other authors who failed to deliver. It is a public humiliation, a professional death sentence. He is $500,000 in debt, his credit ruined, his reputation as a reliable journalist destroyed. He has alienated his friends and worried his family sick. He sits in his apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of the Tate LaBianca victims, and realizes he has become a casualty of the same story that killed them. He has sacrificed his future to understand their deaths, and now he has nothing to show for it but a mountain of paper and a lawsuit. Yet, in the midst of this ruin, O'Neill finds a strange clarity. The lawsuit strips away the illusion that he is writing a standard true crime book. He is no longer bound by the expectations of the commercial market or the artificial deadlines of corporate publishing. He is free to tell the story as it actually is, in all its sprawling, messy complexity. He finds a new literary agent who believes in the importance of the work, and together they secure a new deal with a publisher willing to take the risk. He recommits to the project with the fervor of a man who has nothing left to lose. He accepts that he will never find a singular smoking gun, a memo from the CIA director ordering Manson to kill, or a confession from Jolly West admitting to mind control. The truth is not a single object to be found, but a mosaic to be assembled. He returns to the writing with a new strategy. Instead of trying to force the narrative into a conventional shape, he decides to make the investigation itself the story. He will walk the reader through the labyrinth, showing them the dead ends and the trapdoors, the lies and the cover-ups. He lays out the case against the official history piece by piece. He He documents the perjury of Terry Melcher, showing how the prosecutor allowed a key witness to lie about his relationship with the killers to preserve a clean motive. He exposes the negligence of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office, detailing how they raided the Manson Ranch and found automatic weapons and stolen cars, only to release the family days before the murders. He reveals the existence of the wiretap that proved the police knew the motive was a copycat scheme, not a race war, a tape that was destroyed to protect the department's reputation. O'Neill synthesizes his findings on the intelligence community, constructing a circumstantial but overwhelming argument that Manson was a beneficiary of the government's secret war on the counterculture. He presents the timeline of Manson's arrival in Haight-Ashbury, coinciding exactly with the opening of Jolly West's fake crash pad and the start of the CIA's monitoring operations. He layers in the details of Roger Smith's parole supervision, showing how a man tasked with enforcing the law instead facilitated the growth of a criminal cult. He juxtaposes the CIA's MKULTRA experiments with Manson's reprogramming techniques, arguing that the similarities are too precise to be accidental. He does not claim to know exactly how the connection was made, but he demonstrates that the environment in which the family flourished was an artificial ecosystem created and monitored by state actors. The narrative moves to the desert, where O'Neill revisits the excavation of the Barker Ranch. He follows the efforts of the local detective who used a cadaver dog to identify potential burial sites of other victims. The authorities shut down the dig before it can yield results, a final act of suppression that mirrors the original investigation. O'Neill sees this as the ultimate proof that the state has no interest in the full truth. The closure of the case is more important than justice for the dead. He understands now that the cover-up is not a historical event but an ongoing process, a mechanism that continues to function decades later to keep the secrets of the 60s buried. As he nears the end of his manuscript, the news breaks that Charles Manson has died in prison. The media erupts in a frenzy of nostalgia and horror, recycling the same old myths about the demonic hippie cult leader. O'Neill watches the coverage with a sense of detachment. The man who dies is a caricature, a monster created to absorb the collective anxieties of a nation. The real Manson, the petty criminal who was groomed and protected and allowed to fester until he exploded, remains invisible to the public. O'Neill realizes that Manson's death changes nothing. The forces that created him are still in play. The intelligence agencies that manipulated American citizens are still active. The justice system that bends the law to protect the powerful is still intact. He writes the final chapters of his book not as a conclusion but as an indictment. He lays out the cost of the lies told by Bugliosi, by the police, by the doctors. He tallies the lives that were lost because law enforcement refused to arrest Manson when they had the chance. He gives a voice to the forgotten victims like Filippo Tenerelli, whose murder was erased from the record to keep the narrative simple. He argues that the Manson case is not an aberration but a feature of the era, a dark reflection of the chaos unleashed by a government at war with its own people. O'Neill finishes the book in his office in Venice Beach, the same room where he started 20 years earlier. He is older, poorer, and scarred by the journey, but he is finished. He has not solved the mystery in the way a detective solves a crime, with handcuffs and a verdict. He has solved it by destroying the lie that concealed it. He has proven that the story we told ourselves about the end of the 60s was a fairy tale designed to hide a nightmare. He looks at the wall where he once pinned his map of the conspiracy, now bare. The connections are no longer strings on a corkboard. They are pages in a book that will stand as a testament to what really happened. He packs up the files, the tapes, the transcripts, the physical weight of the obsession that nearly killed him. He is ready to let it go, to give it to the world and see if anyone is willing to listen. The story ends with the author acknowledging that while the definitive truth of the Manson murders may remain forever obscured by destroyed files and silenced witnesses, his 20-year odyssey has successfully shattered the official narrative, leaving in its place a haunting and undeniable portrait of systemic corruption, intelligence overreach, and a justice system that chose to protect its secrets rather than its citizens.